right, perfect. Well, we've got a jam-packed agenda, and we will no doubt be tight on time. So with that said, let's dive right in. Again, it's my real pleasure to welcome everybody this afternoon to our session. Just want to give a very, very brief overview of kind of what today's agenda is going to look like. In a moment, we are going to introduce everyone in our audience to the fantastic panel of EdSights friends and partners that we have joining us today to provide some insight and recap and forward-looking analysis in the world of how we can best support our students and trends we're seeing. We're going to then really do a deep dive into the SVS report from 2026. We're going to be guided through some key top lines. And then, in the spirit of, as I mentioned a moment ago, really being forward looking and thinking about how we can harness these findings and really put them to use and put them into play to better things on our home campuses and in our broader speaking higher education community. We're going to have a discussion with the members of our panel about where we go from here. Just a housekeeping note as we continue our discussion this afternoon during today's session, you'll notice that there is a Q&A box feature on your Zoom webinar platform. We've got a fantastic panel. We've got some great questions for them that we have no doubt you'll find interesting and worthwhile, but we encourage and welcome you to submit questions of your own for them. We're going to do our very best to get to them, but as the day and the session goes on this afternoon, please shoot in those questions. I'll be watching it and I'll make sure that we can throw some out to our panel. So without further ado, I'm sorry, one other note I wanted to just throw out. You'll notice on each of the slides that you notice that we project during today's session, there's a QR code that you can access to see the full report of the SVS report. So we encourage everyone to do that after today's session. Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and meet our panel. To very quickly introduce myself, my name is Jordan Stein. I am a proud member of the EdSights team. I lead our public affairs function, really engage with stakeholders in the world of policymakers, higher education systems, and stakeholders across the country that have a real passion and interest in supporting the higher education ecosystem, helping to fuel our partnership and growth efforts. And I'd like to then hand it over to a great friend and partner of EdSights, Dr. Will Miller, to introduce himself. Will.
Hi, Jordan. Thanks. Always excited to be here. My name is Will Miller, Associate Vice President for Continuous Improvement and Institutional Performance at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, based out of Daytona Beach, Florida, but present in 30 states and 11 countries. We have about 40,000 students focusing on aviation and aerospace. And as always, I'm excited to have had the opportunity to read through hundreds of thousands of text messages of all of your students' feelings about whatever they're feeling that particular day, and to sit with this great panel and talk about what some of it means.
Jared, we'll have you introduce yourself here quickly.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Jared Tippets. I am the Vice President for Student Affairs at Southern Utah University. We're located in the southwest corner of the state of Utah in a rural town called Cedar City. We have about 16,000 students who attend our institution, and we have been with EdSights for a number of years here, and I always look forward to this annual report to see how the data shifts and evolves, and look forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Jared. Greg Owens, introduce yourself, please, to our group.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. My name is Greg Owens. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Success and Online Administration at South University. I'm part of our university structure that works predominantly with our online learners. And here we have 11 campuses across our institution. And like Jared said, really excited to get a chance to talk about the student voice score, the feedback that we receive, and kind of what we do with that and how it shapes how we support students year round. So wonderful to be here with you guys.
Thank you, Greg. We'll move to Dr. Hannans, who has, without question, the coolest virtual background of our panelists this afternoon. We'll have you introduce yourself to our group.
Thank you. Dr. Jaime Hannans. I'm the Associate Dean of Extended University, and our background is our beautiful campus. We are not on an island, but we do have the Channel Islands right off our coast. We are one of the smaller of the Cal State University campuses located in Southern California, about halfway between Santa Barbara and LA. And our team serves, many of our team members are here, so I'm excited to have them join us. But we serve online undergraduate and graduate students, as well as some hybrid and in-person graduate programs in our unit. So we're excited to have going into our second year with EdSights.
Thank you very much. And last but most certainly not least, Jessica, love you to introduce yourself to the group and the institution that you represent here today.
Yes, I am Jessica Metz. I am the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at Ivy Tech Community College's Hamilton County campus. We are the newest of our 19 campuses across the state of Indiana, and our particular campus is in Noblesville, Indiana. We serve a really healthy dual credit population. Overall, we have about 10,000 students head count, and a good 6,800 of those are dual credit students, so a really unique population here in Indiana.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And we'll move on to the next slide here in our session this afternoon. And, I assume that most of our friends that are joining us this afternoon have some idea of what the Student Voice Score, or SVS for short, is. But we want to just make sure that before we dive into a recap of this year's analysis, everyone's sort of speaking from the same song sheet and playing with a common vocabulary. For years, the EdSights team has heard feedback from student affairs leaders, provosts, presidents, and other key stakeholders that there's a real hunger to better understand how student sentiment varies across particular populations over time. And for that reason, we're really proud to have reported the SVS consistently since 2024. The Student Voice Score, the SVS, is the first ongoing benchmark of student satisfaction. And what it really serves to do is to give colleges and universities of all sectors and sizes a data-driven view into the student experience within their community. And that's feedback that's informed by constant feedback from thousands of students on their campus. So we really believe, again, that the SVS is the premier way to capture student satisfaction directly from the students at meaningful scale. We're excited to share the results. And now that we kind of know what we're talking about, it's my privilege to turn the program for this segment over to our friend and partner, Dr. Will Miller, to run us through the findings and the methodology relating to the 2026 SVS. Will.
Absolutely, Jordan, and I appreciate that. And what we're going to do for a couple of minutes, we're going to try to keep it to 15 or so we can get to the broader panel discussion, is lay out what the SVS looks at with the methodology. And then Jared and I will walk through some of the high-level pieces. If you've seen this presentation before, Jared and I always have a nice little back and forth for a few minutes on some of the big pressing topics. But the SVS is based largely around a Net Promoter Score, which we've all probably completed at different points in time for various companies or organizations. And ultimately how this is calculated is if a student rates an institution at a 9 or a 10 on their likelihood to recommend the institution to a friend, they're considered a promoter. And then obviously if they list from a 0 to a 6, they are considered a detractor. And if they list them as a 7 or an 8, they're considered passive. And we get questions every year about that methodology, and you look at your numbers and you're like, man, if those 8s counted as promoters, this would up our score so much. But this is an established methodology. If you ever want to look at the traditional original NPS research, it came out from Bain, and there's a lot published. But that means your scores can go from a negative 100, which we have thankfully never seen, to a 100, which we have also unfortunately never seen. But as you consider your scores, recognize that that's the range you're working with in sort of the benchmarks, because that SVS ends up being your promoters minus your detractors. And your passives just fall out of the equation altogether. So your 7s and 8s end up out of there. And I can promise you, as I look at the open responses and what students send, lots of you get thousands and 1,000 pluses. Occasionally we get negative thousands, but that's, a different conversation for a different day. But high level, as we talk about these scores and we look at our sample, 257 institutions, over 125,000 students this year included as well. So every year this is growing. I think when Jared and I did this the first year, we had like 60 schools and like 45,000 students. So we'll talk about institutional types and some of those pieces too. At the highest level, obviously, people want to talk about the overall SVS. So if we aggregate everything together from this population, what do we see? And contrary to what we read about in, the higher ed journals, Inside Higher Ed, the Chronicle, some of the more negative stories we read about, student satisfaction has actually increased over the most recent iterations of the SVS. And that has been broadly for all institution types. So if you look at the overall average SVS, we've gone from a 15 to just over a 22 to a 30 this year. For four-year privates, that's gone from a negative number the first year we did it to a 15. For four-year publics, we've gone from a 16 to a 25. For two-year publics, we've gone from a 40 to a 51. We can talk a little bit about why we think that happens, but it's increasing. So student satisfaction and students recommending their institutions has gone up, which obviously has something to do with we're coming out of COVID still. We might always be coming out of COVID if we're talking about higher ed, it feels like. We have students that are making conscious decisions about where they're going and their institution types. And Jared, you and I talk about this most years, but I think it's an important highlight point is, the two-year publics always do well and people always reach out and they're like, why are they doing such a great job? And for me, a lot of it is the students are there for a purpose. When you look at the open-ended comments, your two-year public students are worried about, do you offer my courses, or price is affordable, and can I park? And anything beyond that is just extra and great. Whereas if you think about a four-year private, where I've spent most of my career working, I'm paying this huge sticker price. I'm promised small classes. I have all of these on-campus pieces. I might be an athlete. Every touch point is an opportunity to psychologically impact that student response. So, Jared, just on the high level here, anything that surprises you? What do you find encouraging? What stands out here?
Yeah, it's some great points there, Will. I, of course, love to see that across the board, we're seeing these increases year over year. I think that's really important and continues to signal to all of us who are doing this work with students that maybe we're, again, starting to feel that or see COVID in the taillights of COVID in the past, and I'm pleased about that. But as I continue to see this come in every year, I'm always fascinated by the sector superiority of the two-year publics. They do so well in this. And I think it's important for us as we go through the slide deck today to remember that SVS is not measuring academic quality or even prestige of institutions or anything like that. This is purely just looking at, are students getting what they want out of their educational experience? Does the value meet, and the cost align? And I think that's where the two-year schools are just doing really well with that. It makes us at a four-year public university pause and think a lot about that value relevance proposition daily, and what that means for our students and their satisfaction, and then their likelihood to stick around. So congratulations once again to the two-year publics. They're just doing so well.
And I can share that, from working with individual institutions that use EdSights, there's definitely a good correlation between, your higher students on SVS are more likely to retain. We don't know about necessarily graduating, but it definitely helps with the persistence piece. So now we're going to break it down into a few of the high-level tags and variables that we get from EdSights institutions, or from a number of them. So larger institutions, this is another one that I think sometimes surprises people, but it's been consistent over time. And again, it's not a perfect trend, but in general, the larger the institution, we see slight increases here. And historically, talking to students and talking to institutions, one of the big things we've noticed is smaller institutions tend to cost more, regardless of tuition discounting. I worked at a small private institution that had a high discount rate prior to Embry-Riddle, and even if they see a sticker price of $50,000, even if they're only paying $10,000, they're expecting a $50,000 experience. So every little notch can go. And larger institutions tend to have more comprehensive resources and more opportunities in some cases to belong. If you start thinking about some of those institutions for EdSights are, R1 state flagship, some are very large, fully online institutions that really cater towards providing that type of wraparound student support service. But another one that has, over time and over multiple waves of this shown that bigger institutions tend to see some benefits. Jared, you're at an institution that falls somewhere in the middle here size-wise. Any thoughts from your campus perspective?
Yeah, we unfortunately, fall in that 10,000 to 20,000 mark. So a little dip there. I think that also speaks to the fact that institutions of our size are large enough to feel like a bigger university, but not quite large enough or funded to the level to be able to provide a lot of the resources and experiences and things that some of the larger larger institutions are experiencing. But, as I look at this data, and, I have the opportunity to learn a little bit more about the back end of this data, but, these really large online universities score really, really well. And, our Southern New Hampshires of the world and things like that. And what's interesting to me is because forever, higher education has sort of looked at small liberal arts colleges, the intimacy, the small class sizes, and really tried to sell those aspects of the educational experience. And yes, that works for a large population of students across the country. But this data really shows that the modern day student is open to other modalities and robust infrastructure and just different ways of doing higher education. This slide was a little bit surprising to me this year, to be honest, to see that really large jump in the 20,000.
Yeah, Jared, I'll say you're absolutely right. I mean, some of the large fully online, you mentioned Southern New Hampshire, which from previous years, folks know have historically scored really well. The wraparound services that are offered to students are just at a different level in a lot of cases. And you also, again, have students that are there with a particular goal in mind. I think schools that sometimes struggle on the SVS, you're getting students that haven't quite figured out what they're doing, which means they're more susceptible to having outside noise impact things like the SVS when they're answering, as opposed to if I am there with this particular goal and this is what I am looking to accomplish, and you are not putting barriers in the way of me doing that, I'm going to recommend you to somebody else in the same boat I am. So moving on from institution size, and we'll make sure we go a little quicker on some of these. This is my favorite one to talk about, our beloved student athletes who year over year score lower than our average students. And you can see that again this year with significant gaps, including at the four-year privates. And, being honest, the NCAA, whether you're NCAA, NAIA, I mean, athletics is under a significant shift. The fifth-year eligibility rules, NIL, the transfer portals, all of these different components. But one thing about the SVS, to Jordan's point earlier, is it is looking holistically. It's looking at, are you going to recommend the institution? And all of a sudden you introduce being a student athlete, and I might love everything about the institution, but I'm not playing as much as I planned on playing or was told I was going to play. So no, I'd never recommend it. So Jared, obviously you're at a D1 institution that's, if I remember right, changed conferences a few times in the past and had some growth and had some successful years in football and had some non-successful years in other sports. What do you have to say about the student athlete side?
The student athlete stuff, again, like you said, is always so interesting for us to see how it emerges. I think just the one quick takeaway here is that oftentimes those of us who really focus on and work on retention efforts on our institution, we often treat student athletes as safe, if you will, right? That they have all of the resources and the aid and the built-in cohorts and all those things, and therefore will likely retain at really good rates and will be satisfied with their experience. And the data just year over year continues to play out that it probably would be to our advantage, those of us who are in this retention game, to think about ways in which we can partner with our athletic department to try and increase some of that student satisfaction, of course, without the ability to impact playing time and NIL money and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I know this is one that's frustrating, and I'm sure a lot of you on this call are feeling it, where you do throw a lot of extra resources at student athletes. And I mean, for the four-year privates, this should especially be sort of an alarm bell ringing a little bit, because we have plenty of four-year privates that are looking at, 1,000 to 1,500 students that live or die on their class sizes by athletics. My first teaching job as an adjunct when I was in grad school was at a school that 80% of our students were NCAA athletes. And I can tell you that that institution no longer exists. And a lot of it was taking that bet strategy on athletics and then recognizing that the more mobile it is for students to move around, especially from D3, D2 up to D1, the tougher it is to hold on. So just one to keep our eyes on. So moving away from athletics and on to on-campus, off-campus, Off-campus students tend to perform a little bit higher. And I will say that, I think we've seen from a lot of our data, and especially the qualitative data that we'll briefly touch on here in a minute. One of the big things here is on-campus students simply have more touch points where things can go awry. If you think about complaints about dining halls, off-campus students probably don't have those same complaints the on-campus student does, who's relying on that for all meals. Different interaction opportunities, but Jared, I don't actually remember your on-campus, off-campus split, but anything in particular
Yeah,
here for you guys?
we have a good mix of both, but the majority of our students move to Cedar City to attend our institution, and so there's still very much a residential component here. But the thing that has been interesting to me is I saw this slide, I was reflecting upon, I had the opportunity to work with some different universities over the last 6 months on some of their retention efforts. One of the things that has emerged in every one of those conversations is this issue around deferred maintenance in their residence halls, and how that is impacting student satisfaction among their students living there. This is just a challenge across higher ed. A lot of people are really struggling with it. There's this expectation that if you live on campus, that you will have, like you were just describing, Will, all of these services, these resources and quality and those sorts of things. But I guess I wasn't quite as surprised this year when I saw the on-campus actually come in a little lower than off-campus. Again, it's also that additional touch points. Maybe some students see it as a lack of freedom. Having said all that, I'll just conclude with, while they may not be as satisfied living on campus, the retention rates are the exact opposite almost globally across the country. Students who live on campus retain at higher rates than students who live off campus in their first year. So interesting data.
Definitely. So moving from on-campus, off-campus to, again, looking at a different student demographic here, race and gender. And this is the slide that, from a methodology perspective, and I saw Julie already sent in the question about response rates. It always makes me a little uneasy just because it tends to vary pretty significantly, and you have some small ends here, especially at an institution level. And this is probably one that we won't spend a whole lot of time talking about, but leave for you guys to consider when you get the slides. But what I will say is these trends have largely continued. Female identifying students tending to have higher SVS scores than males. And then the race and ethnicity groups being somewhat consistent with some small blips. But again, for example, four-year public, 16.8, two or more races, you're at a significantly lower size there. From an identification perspective, and a significantly smaller number of institutions send this tag data along. It's still valid, it's still significant, but just important to note that not as easy to bring those up on. And then if we go from race and gender, the themes, these we're not going to spend a ton of time on. These are there really for you to get with the deck, because we have folks representing all of these institution types that instead we're going to have Jordan kind of walk through. But you'll see some key things on strengths and concerns for two-year publics. And Dan, if you kind of want to rapid fire our way through these, that'll be great. Four-year publics, and we have sample quotes from students that let you know what we're hearing. De-identified, of course. But some nice themes this year. Four-year privates, and again, it gets into a lot of time, a lot of money, as Jared mentioned, deferred maintenance, all sorts of different pieces there. And then we have the honors list, which is new this year. And Jordan, if you want to touch on this.
Of course, Will, and thank you very much for the rundown of top lines there. Obviously, great information that's going to really color the discussion we have in a couple of minutes. While the group that's joining us on our panel and the audience that's with us this afternoon would likely be the first to acknowledge that there is still immense work to do in supporting our students and creating campuses that are first-class experiences, we at EdSights, and I assume all on our panel, really believe that it's important to celebrate success. And with that, we've implemented this year a list that we call the SVS Honors List, which is in each particular sector and cohort of institution, a set of institutions that really have risen above the rest. And what I'm going to do here real quick is kind of go through the top three institutions on our honors list for each of our cohorts. And you can obviously note that you'll be receiving these slides and this presentation after today's session so you can read the full list yourself. For two-year public institutions, we want to congratulate, among others on this list on your screen, Arkansas Northeastern College, Windward Community College, Somerset Community College, and as well, I'm just going to skip here on the list also to acknowledge Ivy Tech Community College, Hamilton County, in honor of the fact that we have a senior leader from the institution joining us on our panel today. Jessica, thank you so much. Dan, we'll move to the next slide here for our next cohort of institutions, which is our four-year publics. We're going to congratulate, among others, again on this list, University of West Georgia, Northwest Indian College, and Athens State University, which is down in the great state of Alabama. So with that, we'll move on to our next sector list here. Dan, we'll switch to the next slide, please. And that is our four-year private institutions. Want to call out here again, amongst others that you see on your screen here on our slide, Columbia Southern University, Southern New Hampshire University's undergraduate program, and Southern New Hampshire University's graduate program, covering both. And with that, we're going to move into really what we mentioned earlier was going to be the meat and potatoes of today's session. We've seen the data. We really want to now have a real good discussion about what this means and sort of the question of so what and where do we go from here. So I want to start off with our panel, all of whom I should add are representing SVS Honors List institutions. What you found to be the most interesting in the SVS data this year. Now, what you find most interesting could either be in the report in totality or from your own institution's particular results. We'll start with Dr. Hannans here with this question. Kind of give us a flavor for what you found most compelling and interesting from the data that we just saw Will present.
Yeah, I would say the trend around on-campus versus online. Now, our group serves mostly online programs with our population, and so that's who we're trying to listen to make sure they feel connected to our campus. But I'm curious around this difference between on-campus and off-campus from the sense of, has there been a trend where there are more technically off-campus students that might be online? And so those numbers, as we've seen the trend over the couple of years, differentiate or continue to be where on campus, as mentioned, more touch points, absolutely, more places where things can go wrong. But is part of it also maybe the increase across higher ed to serve online students having some impact as well, where they, you have more online students? I'm curious about that total number and if that's having an impact in those off-campus, on-campus groups.
No, thank you for that feedback, Jaime. That's a very interesting point. And I think a good segue to bring Greg Owens into the conversation. Greg, I know, you're someone with kind of experience and exposure and leadership in the online advisement world. Could either be something about that or could also be about just what you perhaps found most interesting this year in the report.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, maybe twofold. I mean, what I found most interesting in the report, the score is exciting to be amongst the top performing institutions, right? But what I found was valuable was kind of the themes behind the score in my mind really didn't change. When you read the feedback, our students continue to tell us it's not so much new technology or process. It's just feeling that you have you're connected to someone who truly, genuinely, cares about your success, right? And for our themes, it came up time and time again. They referenced their academic counselor, an instructor, a staff member that helped them encourage it, and it helped encourage them and navigate it, right? So that feeling, right? And that's how I think for an online distance learner, distance institution, what I represent, it's fundamental. It kind of reinforces student success is fundamentally built on those relationships, right? And that's when we review kind of the scores, but the themes behind it kind of validates that. And specifically on the online component, because it's a great conversation between on campus and off campus or distance learning. When we approach, I don't think we're necessarily our goal is not to replicate maybe that campus experience. It's just to create that sense of connection. Students feel like that they belong, they know someone's sees them when they're struggling and invest in their success. And for us, it really just starts with that academic counselor, right? A dedicated person that's going to be with them through their journey, celebrate milestones, check on them when things are getting tough. I think that advisor coupled with our communication, we try to be intentional about, technology like EdSights, right? Helps us scale the outreach to better understand how our students are feeling first and foremost, right? So we don't use technology to kind of replace those relationships, but just help strengthen them, right? Because we want to know when students feel overwhelmed and frustrated and are considering stopping out, right? That's our cue to have a meaningful human connection. So, I think what we've seen in our plight is maybe students don't necessarily need to be on campus to feel connected. They just need to know they're not going through it alone. And that's where, coupled with us, coupled with EdSights, that's kind of how we see, I guess, twofold, Jordan. The question of what surprised me was kind of the themes, and then that larger question about online support. What stood out to me, just hearing the great feedback we get from the student voice score with partnership here with EdSights.
Appreciate that, Greg. Jessica, I want to bring you into the conversation here from Ivy Tech. You've had an opportunity to obviously see today's rundown, but also review the report. Curious what struck you and what sort of is the kind of key takeaway from your perspective. Love you to share that with our group here this afternoon.
Yes. Well, kind of to dovetail on what Greg said, I think that connection point was a huge piece of our comments from students. We were really pleased to see that the two-year publics were doing so well in a commuter space. We are a non-residential campus. We know a lot of our students are part-time and off campus. So that connecting piece is really important to us because we know that begets retention and persistence and completions. So making sure we're finding ways to intentionally foster that both in the classroom, but in our spaces, and I say our spaces from the student affairs standpoint, not just in those advising meetings, but in the student life pieces, just in the hallways, just being visible for our students. We think that impacts things quite a bit for them. And I think our comments from students were really ringing true for that too.
Thank you, Jessica. Jared, want to bring you here on this one. I know we had the opportunity to hear some of your thoughts and analysis throughout the discussion, but just want to give you the opportunity, kind of if you were to have to highlight that singular kind of, oh my gosh, observation from SVS 2026, what would that be?
I think it's back to a reminder and just again the differentiation between the sectors. Again, as we think about the work we do on our own campuses, I think all too often we try to replicate things that are happening across lots of sectors. And yes, while we can learn from what people are doing across all these different sectors, it's important, I think, also for us to hone in on who we are as institutions and provide the best set of experiences, services, and things that students are looking for within our own unique, our own unique ways in which we are situated. I just think sometimes when I've worked with some two-year schools, they're trying to act like four-year private residential schools and don't. I think just as Jessica was just describing, know who you are and do that really well. Anyway, I hope that's something that maybe folks take away from today is just embrace who you are and do that really well.
Thank you, Jared. Will, we had the opportunity to hear you zoom in on a ton of our data from SVS 2026. Want to give you the opportunity now to kind of zoom out and tell us, much like we just asked Jared, what that kind of number one kind of observation, discussion point, thing that's got you thinking is.
Yeah, and it's so great, Jordan, because I said this was the one question I wanted to weigh in on, and then I was going to disappear. But I mean, what Jared and Jessica and Jaime and Greg have all talked about gets there. Mission, intentionality, and focus. When I look at the schools, especially the schools that have lower SVS, they're schools that are financially struggling. They're schools that are adding programs left and right, trying to just stay afloat and have students. There's a recognition here of being good at what you want to be good at. The schools that score really well tend to be mission focused with clear mission statements versus kind of the broad, we do everything for everybody. And I think that intentionality your students feel And this is evidence that they're feeling that you're doing these things for a reason versus, simply being a higher ed institution because that's what you've always been. So I think that intentionality gets rewarded with SVS scores, and I think that's really important as we pan out and think 5, 10, 15 years into the future with all of the challenges higher ed is facing. This should give us hope at a way to really move forward.
Thanks, Will. And you hit on a couple of things that, whether you intended for it to be or not, is actually a great segue into a question I want to get the group's take on now. Will talked about intentionality. He talked about mission. I think what that really also gets at is expectations that students have of an institution. And something that was somewhat ironic, or perhaps counter to what some folks might have thought about the results that we saw, was on-campus students at four-year private institutions reported satisfaction 59% lower than their off-campus peers. And this is a pattern that we saw hold up across sectors of learning and institution types. So given that on-campus students have more contact with the institution versus less, what might this disparity tell us about where expectations perhaps aren't being met? Dr. Hannans, want to give you an opportunity to weigh in on this question because it is somewhat interesting, and I'm curious, kind of how you, your colleagues, your broader sector peers might be thinking about this.
I'm really curious about the communication that goes out, right? So for on-campus students, my daughter's going to college in just a couple weeks. So I have this real relevant experience right now from, a freshman perspective that's going on campus. If you're getting communication that's not coordinated across multiple campus systems, so you get financial aid and you get housing messaging and you get, registration messaging, if every unit is kind of functioning on their own, there's much more opportunity for there to be miscommunication and thus expectations that maybe are seemingly not met if that communication isn't either coordinated or in some way consistent with how it's coming through, follow-up and outreach. I mean, I think we've really worked hard on our team in trying to streamline communication with our on-campus programs and partners and timing even course registration, aligning that timing so there isn't confusion from different populations of students. So I feel like in some ways, maybe it's not intended for expectations to not be met. Of course, every campus wants all of their students to be happy, but maybe there's some operational things, either whether it be messaging, timing, that really can get in the way. Also, we're seeing a different population of how students engage with email, text, right? So are all the emails and is all the information being read and absorbed? I mean, I think that's another thing that's a bit of a challenge over time where you say, okay, how are students today engaging with information and absorbing information? And is email the best way of communication right now to get what you need across when it's critical? Or are there multiple other ways, which I know many, many campuses are also using different forms of text messaging. Of course, with EdSights, we can be more aware and try to really listen and do even those custom campaigns to get what we need, the information we need from students. But learners are changing. The world is changing, right? Very rapidly. And I think making sure conversations are happening about that could be really important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hannans. Jessica, I want to bring you in on this, kind of this question of sort of that nexus between expectation setting, expectations being met on campus, off campus, contact more or less. Kind of where's the meeting place there, and how's this kind of register on your radar?
Yeah, we live in a pretty college-going county here in Hamilton County, so it's been an interesting study in how students come to us. We see a lot more in person than we really thought we would at this juncture, especially, and I think some of that has to do with being online for so long. The students really want to come in, get their questions answered, and walk away. And I think when they're able to do that, that experience, like the positivity of that experience just rises. Conversely, we try to get them to come on campus in person too for their classes, at least in that first semester, so they can kind of get a handle on that as well. I think that impacts it as well, just what to expect from our faculty, our staff, and our resources on campus. But it is a really interesting data point to look at. It's not something that you would necessarily predict.
Greg, want to get your thoughts here. I know from the online perspective, it's sort of an interesting discussion kind of around expectations being met and where there may be sort of some dead space there, but very curious your perspective on how you think about this at South and your leadership.
Yeah, I really like what Jamie said around the communication aspect of it, right? In there, how we portray information and send information to our students, right? Is email, I could pull up my phone and look at my personal email, and I'm probably 1,000 behind, right? In there, and we have a similar flight for students to log into their student email account, right? It's double down. So I wonder, a lot of it's the messaging going out. How do we entertain how do we engage our students, right? How do we make it attractive in the new world, right? Certainly platforms like EdSights again could help us, right? Intentionality, and we try to be very intentional around our custom campaigns and what our chatbot's called Stinger the Stingray. So what Stinger is sending out to students, we want that to have its own unique voice. But ways to engage students through podcasts and webinars and the online, which is new for us, right? It's bringing people together. We recognize not everybody can jump on a orientation or something with a faculty member at 3 o'clock. They might have chose online because they're working adults. But I think I do agree with the communication aspect. What I do, the tie back to the student voice score, though, what I really like about it, it helps us. Like Jamie talked about her daughter going through and having that freshman year experience through a different lens. I think for leaders on online, your ground 2 4 year, whatever, everybody on the call, what I value about the student voice score, it's not just another data point. I think it's one of the few metrics I think that gives us what's happening, not only what's happening, but kind of how our students are experiencing what's happening, right? And that perspective causes reflection, right? Like, our intention was to deliver X, Y, or Z, and our students are telling us that went way in left field, right? So it's interesting how we get that feedback even through these data points in the score, but also those open-ended comments, on the voice score. But I do think it's a lot of our intentionality matching what their expectations are. There's a gap there at certain points in time.
Thank you, Greg. Jared, want to bring you in on this one. And one additional layer I want to put in kind of the color, how I frame this to you. We had an interesting comment come in our chat, which I appreciate. Basically, one of our audience members said, I believe we're continuing to feel the impact of the COVID pandemic and resulting social anxiety and isolation, and also how students protect their time and energy expenditure has changed. Students are still relearning how to be in person. Curious to what extent you think that element of this could potentially factor into this question around expectations. And just because a student is on campus for a particular amount of time, that may or may not equate with expectations being met. Want to give you an opportunity to jump in here.
It is such a fascinating world we live in right now. For those of us who work on these residential campuses, we often are asking our students, what do you want? What are you looking for? We do the surveys, we do the focus groups, then we present the students with whatever it is that they're asking for, and then they don't show up, right? And so we have this challenge of a group of students who are very much interested in engaging and getting involved in doing those things. And we are seeing some of our attendance increase in some areas, but we also, at the flip side, are still struggling to get a group of students to participate and engage, and those students who prefer to isolate in their rooms, spend time on Netflix, TikTok, Instagram, those sorts of things. It's still very much more comfortable for them. All of that just to say, we're all wrestling with this. We're still all trying to figure it out, and trying to be all things to all people, which was highlighted earlier as a caution for all of us, to be careful how we approach that. I wish I had really good answers to that, Jordan. If I did, we'd be in even a better spot. But it's a challenge. We look at retention rates across the country. In many cases, have dipped for the last year or two. We're just in new, interesting times right now, and so I think it's find your sweet spot, communicate effectively to the students so that their expectations match what we're offering, and and yeah, and then just try to not be all things to all people. I think that's one of the things that really challenges us in higher ed.
Now, another great segue, Jared. I want to go to Jessica here, kind of on that topic of sort of being true to who you are. The top two strengths in the SVS this year for two-year public institutions were affordability, helpful faculty, and student services. But course availability and scheduling limits actually showed up as a top concern. Curious how you and your team and your institution are balancing access with capacity at Ivy Tech, and curious whether student feedback has changed, whether and how you've approached things like registration and scheduling processes for students.
Mhm. Um, Our population changes from year to year. I'm sure everyone experiences that. So it is really hard to find that sweet spot of the perfect time, the perfect place to offer courses and the right modality. One of the things that we did in response to what our students were telling us was build in some guided pathways where we proactively shared, here's when these courses will be offered. This is what you can expect from us. And kind of going back to that expectations piece, we will promise to run these courses in this time frame. So you can work your schedule around what we are doing. And then as a result of that, that has helped us get those courses to run in the right format at the right time, so students can kind of plan around that. That's one thing that I think we've done. The other thing is we've really worked with our students to talk about that modality conversation. We realize students can't drive to campus all the time, and they might want to move online, but we also have the option to do some virtual courses. So we ran a custom campaign to really dig in on modalities, and as a result, we built in some specific courses on Saturdays, some virtual options, and those are filling really quickly for our fall term that starts here in a couple weeks. So it's that being able to respond in a nimble space where we can get that to see if it'll work, get that proof of concept, and then go ahead and make those changes more systemically.
Thank you, Jessica. That's makes a lot of sense, and the adaptability is really a core tenet of what we've heard around so much of today's conversation. Kind of along with adaptability, I want to bring in Dr. Hannans here. Adaptability, is often equated with responsiveness, and responsive advisors and instructors are a top strength in the data that we've seen in the SVS this year. Curious to get your take on what responsiveness actually looks like operationally on your team and at your institution. We think about things like turnaround time for student questions and requests, proactive check-ins, but it might be something else. Curious how you define and perhaps even hold your team accountable.
Yeah, we are very grateful to have a dedicated staff person to respond to our EdSights, voice from students. And while, of course, using EdSights and the AI text really gives us capacity beyond one person, we do really I'm from a nursing background, so I like to say we holistically support the students, right? I mean, we really do try to do this wraparound support. So intentionality about how we use EdSights for certain messaging versus one-way text messaging. So really defining what that means. So if it's just a reminder about a registration date or a payment deadline, we're not going to use EdSights for that. We're not going to do a custom campaign for that. We're really going to be intentional about wanting to hear the student's voice and having campaigns that we are getting information back from the students that we need to support them. So, we have the framework, of course, but then beyond that, we really think about that in any of the custom campaigns that we run. But we do also try to time our messaging and campaigns, not on a Friday, not on the end of the week where there's not going to be anybody available. Really early in the week, we've even had a look at some of the data of when students are most engaged and checking messages or responding to things and time it around that to really serve our unique population. So our team has been really amazing at really trying to say, where are the students at? How do we meet them where they're at so they get the messaging in a timely manner? We also have some great faculty advisors that, they use links to do bookings so that the students can get a link and not have to go through a whole email back and forth process to set up an appointment with an advisor. So when we do point them to advisors, having space where they can get connected in a time that works for them. So I think just a number of different strategies around timing, easy access, messaging. We do also pair and highlight in our responses back our chatbots that we use for student support, because when we're not there, we want 24/7 answers for the students so that it works around when they're studying or when questions come up for them, and it's not necessarily that Monday through Friday 9 to 5.
You bring up, Dr. Hannans, kind of this concept of that, sort of not Monday through Friday 9 to 5, and sort of that question of meeting students where they are. Greg, you're in the interesting position to that note of leading both online and in-person populations. So the data in this year's SVS analysis shows that four-year private students report real warmth around flexibility and personalized attention. Curious to get your take as someone with a lot of experience in this area, how you replicate the sort of feeling at home quotient in a fully online environment when you don't necessarily have physical campus touch points to lean on. I think that's a question that, a lot of people are probably wondering, but a lot of people probably don't have a great idea about.
Yeah. Just for the panel, I've met Jaime and Jessica and Jared 15 minutes before this. So when I agree with, we didn't we didn't pre-plan this because I think you're hitting on an important theme of your communication, right? To answer your question around how you make that support without a physical location, right? In there, a online distance learner, right? Yeah, it starts with building trust, right? Like, if the student believes that there's a real person in their corner, like that knows they're rooting for them, like helps them bridge all the gaps, right? From resources that they feel that connection at the institution. You know, our challenge is to replicate that even if a student never steps foot in one of our campus locations. Unlike some of my colleagues, we have kind of hybrid models. We have campus locations where students could pop into if they're in driving distance of one of our location, they could go in and take the course if it's offered at the campus. Like it's not a different set of curriculum a lot if it's a program that we offer both in an online space and a ground campus space. But it's intentional, the communication, right? The tech like EdSights still helps us scale to better understand how our students are feeling. The SVS score gives us the good, but then when you look at, hey, my mind, I saw the score and we went to the positivity and said that outweighs the negative, right? But when you read through it, also the nice trend of it gives us what their experience that isn't going so great, right? And we've taken it kind of operationally from other metrics we get. A larger data set, a larger student satisfaction survey we might run yearly or bi-yearly that offers questions that are hundreds to one simple. Do you like how you're being supported? Yes or no? Tell us why. That simplicity really helps shape us. And then for the online modality, it's then taking that feedback we get and really champion that someone's in their corner, that they don't feel alone. And doing that in a virtual space. It's still, we're lifetime learners in it. So, as much as as much as you have a success, there's someone that needs something different. And it's just trying to make sure all the students just feel that they have a level of support that they can count on.
Thank you, Greg. As I could have very easily predicted, with a kind of panel that's this sophisticated and with great insights from the ground, we're running tight on time here. So I want to just get to a last couple of bits and pieces of questioning here in a bit of a kind of lightning round style. Jessica of Ivy Tech, I want to bring you in on this one. Because you, along with others on our panel here, and many in our viewing audience today, already work with EdSights, you're always collecting this kind of student feedback in real time, not just once a year. I'm curious from your perspective, what, if anything, has changed about how you and your team have made decisions since you started getting real-time student sentiment instead of waiting for sort of a snapshot, kind of annual survey kind of data dump?
Yeah, this is hard to answer really quickly, Jordan. So, this is one of those things where we start seeing patterns early and then can make adjustments to what support services we've got available to students in the form of workshops, in the form of awareness of resources, like maybe help us decide what kind of custom campaigns we want to run because we realize students aren't aware of something on campus. Having the ability to do that early instead of waiting to the end just gives us a leg up on helping students get to that place. And they tell our chatbot so many things that they don't tell us in person. So it's just been really eye-opening to see what they'll share there. The key for us, I think, is that we respond in human to them too. Yes, chatbot's responding, but we have to get in there and let them know that we are hearing that feedback.
Thank you so much. Jared, want to come to you here as someone who's sort of in some ways, among the deans of EdSights partners and having been with us for a while on this journey. For folks in our audience that are earlier in their journey or maybe thinking about beginning to work with a platform like EdSights, what would you tell them about the first couple of months of actually listening at this sort of scale? Like, did anything surprise you, good, bad, ugly? Kind of helping people expectations set here. Would love your take.
Yeah, for those of you who are just starting, this will resonate with you, right? When you turn on EdSights, all of a sudden it's like turning on a bright light in a messy room of sorts, right? And all of a sudden you see all the cobwebs and you see the dust and it just can be overwhelming at first, right? We started to capture a lot of insights about our students that we were not necessarily seeing through other avenues. That's the power of hearing the student voice. And for so long, we would go through a semester, look at the data, ask why did students not retain or graduate or what's going on? And it was always just so delayed. And now, as we dig into the data that comes in every day, we're trying to figure out what operational frictions can we remove in the moment, right? And so the other thing I would just say about our EdSights partnership is it has created a lot of work for us. A lot of work. We started with one full-time staff person, and I don't want to scare anyone off, but we have significantly increased the staff who work our EdSights data as case managers, and we are continuing to repurpose dollars toward that effort to help students in the moment with the challenges they face. It's incredibly powerful. The work is increased. The work is really good and much more impactful and meaningful for us today.
Jared, that's a fantastic way to bring us toward the end. And the work is everything. As now NBA world champion Jalen Brunson says, the magic is in the work. And I know that most would agree with that. We are at our time mark here. Want to give a huge thank you to our entire panel and everyone who participated in making the SVS 2026 a smashing success and really shining a light on the student voice. Will Miller, thank you for walking us through the data today. Dr. Jared Tippets, Southern Utah, thank you for your analysis and insights as always. And thank you to our panelists, Greg Owens, Jessica Metz, and Dr. Jaime Hannans. We are EdSights. We thank everybody so much for joining us today. Please contact us. You see the contact information here on our screen. You can reach us via our website, edsights.com. Thank you so much, and we look forward to working with and engaging with so many of you in the days, months, and years ahead to create a student-centric, student-facing higher education system that provides first-class experiences across the country and institution types. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great afternoon, and we'll all be in touch soon. Take care.